Okay, hi. I'm Boruch Rabinowitz, making a difference for the Jewish people. And we have an interview today. I'm very excited with Rabbi Shalom Schwartz. Hi, Shalom.
Hi, Boruch.
You're in the holy city of Jerusalem, and I'm in New York, New Jersey. So it's nice to interview you. We go back a long way. We go back since 1977, when I first came into Aish, and I met you, and you were there for me. I needed to speak to somebody going through a lot of changes myself, and you were one of the people that I felt that I can really confide in. And actually, we go back a long way. We started Aish Toronto together and have done many other things. I consider to be a very close friend. Shalom, you, thank you. You were in Aish for 7 years, from back in 72, the early days, actually before Aish. You were one of the founding first 7 people that founded Aish Torah back in 74. You were with Rabbi Weinberg, our Rebbe, before that, in Or Sameach, and before that. I'd like to hear a little bit about that. Then Toronto, you made Aliyah. You were in Toronto for 10 years. You made Aliyah, and you started a program, Operation Community, which was an educational and social network for Russian Jews in Israel and the former Soviet Union. And then you do coaching. You're now involved, and you started Project Aseret, which is the 10 statements, 10 commandments, the core values of the Jewish people. I don't want to, you have a beautiful family, children, 7 children, a wife, beautiful wife, grandchildren, and you're doing tremendous things for the Jewish people. And that's really why I want to interview you. So tell me, I'd like to hear, like, from it first started, what was it I look at you as being a very proud Jew. You're very proud of who you are as a Jew. And I'm just wondering, where did that start? How did you get that?
It's interesting that you're picking that. I don't think I ever viewed myself as a proud Jew, frankly. My associations with being Jewish growing up were not that positive. I just had my 50th anniversary of my bar mitzvah this past Shabbat, and I was reflecting on my experience at that stage. I think I was a little turned off by the association of proud Jew with kind of this cultural, ethical, ethnic phenomena. I was very idealistic as a young person, and I didn't see Judaism at that time as speaking to that idealism. So when people talked about being proud as Jews, to me it was an association with sort of a club, and I wasn't interested in being part of a club. But the minute I discovered that the wealth of wisdom that's in Judaism, and the real mission of the Jewish people to be a light unto nations, to really bring the world to a realization of themselves and of God and our purpose. So yes, I'm certainly proud of that, and proud that I'm a part of this people that has that destiny.
And I think, like, what you're doing now, if you could talk a little bit about the Aseret project, that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to share the core values of the Jewish people to the world. I know a person, Dr. Harlan Weissman, maybe you know him. He was one of the top guys in Johnson & Johnson. And when he always talked about at Johnson & Johnson, they called it the credo, which was like their core values as a company. And everybody had to be very familiar with it, and they would have meetings. Are we following the credo? And it reminds me of what you're doing with Atzeret is really the core values for the Jewish people, for the whole Jewish nation. Can you talk a little bit about why you think this is so important? And I'm also interested to know, when you say the 10 Commandments to the older generation, it's still, I think, it sounds very traditional. But the way you describe it is not the 10 Commandments, just it's a matter of, yes, what you can do, what you can't do, but they're really core values, how they really play into our lives. Can you talk a little bit about the Aseret Project and why you think it could really make a difference for the Jewish people?
One of the things that I learned from Rabbi Weinberg, from Rabbi Noah, our Rebbe, was that he used to begin many of his discussions with the medrash that teaches that before we're born, we're given this personal angel that teaches us all of Torah before we're born. And just as we're born, we're touched here and we forget it all. And of course, that raises the question, well, why do we have to learn it and if we're going to forget it? And I think that the key insight that I got from that is that really when we study wisdom as opposed to knowledge or any skill, the experience of realization of wisdom is an experience of remembering. It's not a question of, oh, I'm learning this for the first time. It's oh yeah, I see, I know that, I knew that. It's an experience of remembering, and this is very central to Jewish teachings. We talk about remembering as a key to our relationship to Mount Sinai, to Shabbat, to going out of Egypt. Memory is a key element in all understandings of Jewish destiny and Jewish mission. We have this collective memory that we're tapping into. And specifically, the idea of living with what you stand for, with living with who you are, being authentically yourself, is also very tied in with a sense of remembering who we are. It's almost like I once heard a description of our purpose here in this world to awaken from a spiritual amnesia, that we're all walking in a kind of forgetful state, that we're souls, that we have a sense of destiny and that we have purpose and that we've come into this world, and every moment of gaining new insight into ourselves and wisdom and discovering who we are is not new. It experiences it as new, but simultaneously it's an act of remembering. And to me, that's been also always a very resonant and very essential dimension of education. So the idea of core values is not that it's something that you're taking a list of what you want to do only. It's not only the things that you feel important, it's uncovering that which is within your soul. It's uncovering that which is authentically yours. And when you live with that which is essentially who you are, then there's a shlemut, a wholeness, a peace, an inner peace, a tremendous motivational force, because you're at one with yourself. And the Ten Commandments, the Medrash says, were actually, before they were engraved on the tablets of the 10, the famous tablets of the covenant, Luchot HaBrit, our tradition teaches, the Medrash, the Mechilta says, that they were actually printed on the Jewish soul. They were engraved on our hearts and souls prior to being engraved on the tablets, which means that there's an imprint from Mount Sinai that is kind of our spiritual DNA. And the sources indicate that this was given to us as our special means to fulfill our mandate to be a Am Kadosh, Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, to a special mission that wasn't only for the Jewish people, but really for the whole world. So this idea that we were given 10 statements at the outset of our mission at Mount Sinai, kind of our founding mandate, was imprinted on our souls so that we would have the values, the character, and the vision of what it is that we're here to achieve, is to me a very powerful educational paradigm for awakening the Jewish people to our mission and purpose. And that's what we found. And the Ten Commandments not only have a wonderful, still resonant PR, that people, the impression that people have of the Ten Commandments as being the foundation of Western civilization, the values that the Jewish people have given to the world. But they also speak very deeply personally to every person, especially to every Jew. So that's why I find it a very exciting process, because you're not teaching something that's outside of the individual's experience. You're awakening their own memory to what they know, and you're awakening to what we collectively have carried as the Jewish people's core values. So that to me is very exciting, and the work that we're doing is proving that this is the case. It's something that's been growing very quickly, and people respond to it with a great deal of enthusiasm and a near sense of ownership. It's not something I'm learning new. It's something that I remember to be true. It's something that's mine.
That's a very, it's a very subtle but powerful idea that really you're awakening what people already have inside of them, that they have this intuitive understanding that has been implanted in them, and it's just a matter of bringing it out. Can you give an example of how you would teach or bring out one of the relevant issues of the Ten Commandments to show that people know this already and they can use it in their lives?
Okay, I'll give you an example that I discovered in a conversation with my 9-year-old granddaughter. I was having a conversation. It was based on the last of the Ten Commandments, number 10, Lo Tachmod, don't covet. And the Vilna Gaon says that the don't covet is it's a foundation of the entire Ten Commandments. It's a foundation of the whole Torah. And it's clear that he's speaking about a dimension of not coveting that goes beyond what the Sforno calls the mitzvah karit, the central mitzvah of don't covet. And he's talking about it as a core value. And as a core value, don't covet speaks to this idea that somehow we all have something unique. We shouldn't look for our fulfillment by looking at what someone else has, whether it's their physical possessions or even their job, their wealth, their wife, their status, whatever they're doing is not for us. Everybody has their unique place in the universe. So I was sitting with my granddaughter Shoshana, and I said to her, Shoshana, tell me, do you know how many people there are in the world? And she said, no, Saba, I don't know. How many are there? I said, they say there's about 7 billion people. 7 billion people, that's a lot of people. I said, tell me, how would you feel if you met somebody that was just like you? She said, what do you mean? I said, somebody that, looks like you, talks like you, walks like you, thinks like you. She said, there's nobody like me. But there's 7 billion people. Don't you think you'd meet somebody that's just like you? No. I said, well, what about in all of history? If you go back in time and, since Adam was born until now, there's a lot of people. Do you think there's somebody that's just like you out there? And she said, no, there's nobody just like me. I said, how do you know? She said, I know. And this is the Arizal, of course, says this and points us out this intuitive truth that we all know intuitive. We know this to be true, that there's a unique self that we carry. How do we know it? Because we've been implanted with that appreciation that we are unique. We're not like anybody else. No matter how many people there are, my particular unique self was given to me uniquely, and therefore don't covet says don't look outside at somebody else's situation, what they have, good or bad. Anything that's outside of you is not going to be the key to your fulfillment. Be happy with who you are. Rejoice in your uniqueness. That's in the core value of the Ten Commandments. But the example is, we know it from within. You don't need to look for proofs outside of yourself. Just look inside yourself and appreciate that uniqueness. And we give these types of examples to the students, and everywhere we teach this, helping people to realize what they already know and to remember it.
Very good. It's a great example. You can learn so much. They're so intuitive. A 9-year-old granddaughter has it, got it. That's great. Shalom, I want to take you back now to about 1980, when you were you started one of the first Kiruv branches, outreach branches in the United States. When you were with Rabbi Weinberg in Toronto, meeting with Joe Berman of blessed memory to start Aish Toronto. Can you share that story with us? How it all started?
Can I start with a little joke?
Sure. But I have to ask you something, because there's a tiger behind you, and I'm just curious to know what's the tiger all about? Put a tiger.
My office is filled with tigers. I identify very much. My wife, both, and I have a very strong affinity for tigers.
Okay.
It says in the Mishnah, you should be oz kanemer. You should have the impudence of a tiger to do the will of the Almighty in heaven.
Very good.
Father in heaven. Takes courage. So I remind myself of that as I walk into this room every day.
Great.
There's a story about a Magid, a storyteller that would go to different cities throughout Poland, the Ukraine, and he had a driver that went with him, and the driver would accompany him to all these talks. And after a certain, he'd given it hundreds of times of similar talks. And at one point, the driver said to him, you know, Rebbe, I know this talk as well as you do. I want to give the talk. You mind? You know, I'll dress up like you and I'll give the talk. Is that okay? He said, yeah, okay, fine. We'll try it one time. Anyways, the Rebbe gives his clothes to the driver. He puts on the clothes of the driver, and the driver is giving the drasha. He's speaking to the group, and he's doing an amazing job with all the nuances that the Rebbe's giving it. And it's he finishes his talk, and everybody's very satisfied. And at that point, they turn to questions and answers. And Tony puts his hand up, and he asks a very challenging question to the Rebbe, who was really the driver. And he said, asked this question, and the Rebbe turns, the driver, who was dressed as the Rebbe, turns to the questioner, and he says, that question? That's so easy, my driver can answer it.
That's good, that's good.
So why do I tell you this story at this point? I was Rav Noach's driver in June, I think it was June of 1980. I was studying in yeshiva still at that time. I was finishing off. I had gotten my smicha already. I had just finished my rabbinic ordination, having studied at that point about 6 years in Aish Torah. But I was on a visit to my family, and Rav Noach was fundraising, and I offered to drive him around the city to different donors. And he asked me to get an appointment with Joe Berman, which Joe was very gracious to invite us to his home. And on the way to the meeting, Rav Noach asked those of us in the car. Ben Grossman was there of blessed memory, and the fundraiser at the time of Aish Torah, a man who worked for a period of time with Aish, was there. And we asked Rav Noach, what do you want to ask Joe Berman? What are you going to ask him for? Rav Noach said, a branch. At that time, there was one branch of Aish Torah in North America, in St. Louis, Missouri, which was a small branch. At that time, they had 2 rabbis there. And Rav Noach was thinking of a different model. And they asked him, well, what's a branch? He said, we need 5. We need 5 families to come out to Toronto. He quickly calculated some numbers. We need salaries. We need some program money. And we need time for preparation. We have to train them. We have to do a year of preparation. He had a vision of what it was going to be. He kind of worked it out in the car. I don't know how much he had thought about it before, but it was very clearly, he came up with a model. And after some time with Joe Berman, schmoozing and talking about a bunch of things in the Jewish people, Joe said, how can I help you, Rabbi? He said, Joe, we want you to start a branch of Aish Torah in Toronto. He said, what's a branch? What do you mean? And he described 5 families. We need to create a mini community. We want to turn over the whole city. We want to bring Jewish pride and Jewish identity and Jewish knowledge to the youth here, and not only the youth. And we need to have a strong force, and we have to prepare them. And Joe was listening very intently. And at the end of Rabbi Weinberg's presentation, he said, I'm interested in helping you. Who's going to lead this branch? And he looked and he pointed to the driver. He said, Shalom will. And it was the first time we'd had that discussion. I mean, I had shared with Rav Noach, and I certainly had from the time I was doing my learning, a desire to come back and do something in Toronto. And Rav Noach knew that I was prepared to do that and preparing to do that. But we hadn't discussed it in any formal way. And Joe looked me over and said, okay, I'm in for half. I'll give you half the money. You got to raise the other half. And he bought into a 2-year commitment to prepare and give us 1 year of initial seed money for the branch in Toronto. And that moment changed my life. I mean, from that moment on, I was pretty occupied with the branch, going to my good friend Boruch Rabinowitz and asking him to join me in this mission. You were my first choice, Baruch, my neighbor at that time, and getting the other team members, Mitch Mendel and Moshe Avrik and Aaron Hach, on board and working on curricula and working on fundraising. That was that moment in time.
I remember. Thank you, Shalom, and I'm very. You changed my life by inviting me. I remember long distance telephone calls, international calls, too expensive. So you sent me a letter, asking me to be part of the team. And I received a letter back in Israel. I remember speaking, with Rabbi Weinberg, and Rabbi Noah said, yeah, you got to go. I said, I don't know enough. He goes, you got to go. You're going to change the city. And I remember when I came to the city, the first day, I came to your apartment on Fraserwood, and you gave me a key. Said, we're going to change the city. Here's the key to the city. But when we were training that year, all of us in Jerusalem at Aish, we were sitting in a room, and I remember there was an urgent call for one of the supporters, and he said, this is a suicide mission. There's a recession here. The interest rates were like 22%. The place going bust. You got to go. You can't go. And I remember you came, but you spoke to Rabbi Noah, and you came back into the office. You explained that there was a recession, and this guy didn't want us to go. We have to speak to Rabbi Noah about it. And then Mitch Mandel, Rabbi Mandel, was sitting next to me. I said, Mitch, what's a recession? What did we know? We were just going to change the city. And we did, Baruch Hashem. We accomplished a lot. Thank God. Thank God. Shalom, I know you've done a lot of coaching with people. It's one of your expertises to coach people. I'm just wondering, what do you think what have you found to be one of the core issues that you need to coach people on? What are people dealing with that you feel that most people have? I know everybody's individual, unique. Everybody has their own thing, but have you found like one or two things that are common to most people that they need coaching on?
Well, I never really offered what people refer to as life coaching. I specialized in what I developed as a program based on leadership coaching, specifically leadership coaching based on emunah and tefillah, on a relationship with God and prayer. And so in that context, the reason I focused on that is I think that people, again, from Rav Noach's teachings and guidance that I received, and I think many of us received, was the bitachon, the confidence that the Almighty is always present in our lives, and that if we develop a close relationship with Him in an ongoing way, we get answers to our questions, and that we don't have to tackle life's issues alone. On the contrary, every life issue that appears to us is given to us by God. So if we embrace it and we receive it as a gift, then we can invoke that relationship and the insight that God's always providing in our lives in order to tackle what's in front of us with love. And obviously that's difficult in different situations. It can be overwhelming. It can be horrific. I mean, there are a lot of things that the Almighty throws at us, but the basic principle and the basic inner awareness that we have that the Almighty is with us at those moments is, to me, the most important coaching approach that I try to share with people, and give them the confidence that they can talk it out with God, that they can ask questions and meditate and find answers that come to them, not necessarily through words, but through circumstances, through getting the strength and being able to feel the Almighty's presence in finding the answers to life's issues and challenges.
Yeah, it's very important. I was actually listening to a TED Talk last night about a young girl, a young psychotherapist, counselor, who went through some tragedies. Her mother died at a young age, she got married, her husband died, that her father-in-law died, and she was giving 3 principles of how to get tough and how to really go through life. And the first 2 were great. The third one was, you just got to realize life is not fair. And if you realize life is not fair, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And this was one of her core principles. And this is like the exact opposite of what you are saying, what a Jew should be really feeling, that everything is from Hashem, everything is for the good, and there are challenges, but it's all to get us to grow, and we have to be open to that. So I just wanted to mention that. So just moving forward, Shalom, what do I'm really trying to focus on speaking to people that really want to make a difference for the Jewish people, for the world that are real people. And what do you think are the most pressing issues of the Jewish community and the Jewish people today that we need to address? I know there's a lot of things, but what are a couple of the main things that you think really can make a strategic difference? Obviously, Aseret Dibros is a core that you're working on. But what, aside from that, what else do you think?
I don't often speak about this publicly, but I'll share with you where I'm at with that, because you're my buddy. I'll share it openly. I mean, I think that there's. Let's look at it this way. I've devoted the last 43 years of my life to this endeavor of helping the Jewish people come back to ourselves and to regain our strength and to be able to really remember who we are. And I think if I look at my own, challenges with that and what's gone on in these 43 years, I think there's one really essential component missing, which is that if you imagine if religious Jews, whether they're Bali Tshuva or they grew up religious, we're living in such a way that really lived with this light that we talk about, a light unto the nations. What's missing that's not happening? I mean, why is it that people who are not a part of that, they don't immediately see when they walk into a religious home or community or hear a rabbi speak? Why aren't they immediately drawn to this and say, okay, there are people who you have that reaction to, but not everybody. And why is it that it's so few? And why is it that there's not this really strong emanating light from within the religious communities today, so that so-called non-religious Jews aren't coming as a magnet? They're drawn to it rather than having to reach out to them. It should be some sort of magnet drawing people. And I believe that it has to do with a number of things, but the essence of it is that we haven't really found ways to live with that godliness that we're looking for, living with that divine light that shines from within us, really remembering that we have a divine soul within us, a spark of God, walking with God in a way that is truly enlightened and truly real. And I think that it has to do with the difficulty of prayer the way it's normally experienced today. It has to do with the way Torah is learned, I think, and normally experienced today. I don't think we've brought God into that sufficiently. I think prayer has become too rote. There's a lot of words to cover with proper kavanah, and it's just not working. And I think Torah learning has become too intellectual. It isn't infused with the godly dimension that it's meant to have. And I think that this sense of real love and care that the Torah teaches us to have when we emulate God has not been strong enough. It's kind of not pure enough. It's not living. We're living in a world that doesn't imbue us with that, and we're fighting the world outside, and we have a lot of fear, and a lot of things that we're doing out of habit, and we're too busy to really find a way to do that. I personally have found, Ari Kaplan's teachings on how meditation is the core experience of prayer, and how in Chassidut, how the Torah can be learned with an imbued spirit of God consciousness. I think that these are things that we need to embrace in a much more comprehensive and determined way. And I think if we do that, we'll find that barriers between communities can be melted, that we won't have all this divisiveness within from Hasidim and modern Orthodox and the national religious. All these split between the Haredim and other groups will dissolve, because we'll have the unifying feature, which is our relationship with God, and living more as loving souls will really change the dynamics both internally and ultimately create a different invitation to those that are outside of the religious communities to join and be a part of, because they'll be drawn to it. It's something that will be extremely attractive. So that's my personal take on what we need to focus on now.
Okay, thank you. One last question, a personal question. What's the difference between the Shalom Schwartz that was in his 20s to now the Shalom Schwartz that in his 60s? did the tigers used to be young tigers, or they're older now? Tell me, what do you feel are a major difference in your life now that you've gone through so much and thank God accomplished so much for the Jewish people? You've touched so many lives, and what would you say? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yes,
You don't have to answer that question.
I mean, surprisingly, I feel like I'm just beginning. I think that's not different. I've always had that sense, but I just went through a workshop that was all about awakening the inner child within me, and I think that the difference that I have more recently with what I've done over the years is realizing that maybe it's coming from I just had my 15th grandchild, being able to play with her and having her at home. I think there's something exciting about awakening to your own playfulness, your own appreciation that life is really full of opportunities for joy, full of opportunities for embracing people and God and yourself and enjoying that inner spirit that the Almighty planted within us. I think I was pretty serious in my 20s. I think I'm finally at a point where I can go beyond seriousness to playfulness, not in any frivolous way, but in the same way that when we really feel that we're transcending, we touch the transcendental. There's a feeling of joy that is like a child. And so I feel I aspire to that, and I have a bit of a I think I have that more than I had that when we started in our 20s and 30s, and I'm grateful that the Almighty's given me this new dimension of living that I think is a beautiful, beautiful gift at this stage of my life.
I think one of the things that we share, Shalom, is our relationship to Rav Noah, our Rebbe, our Rosh Hashiva, how even, in his older years, he was really focused on pleasure, enjoying life, loving people. And he was an attraction to people because he would just ooze love. At the same time, he was a serious man. He was a tiger of all tigers, and he was willing to fight and stand up to do the right thing. But at the same time, he was full of life and full of love. Shalom, it's really been a pleasure interviewing you or speaking with you. I hope you can join me again on BoruchRabinowitz.com for another interview. I think your insights were great. I really appreciate you spending the time with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Boruch.